My name's Adele Howitt. I'm an artist and ceramicist, and I work at Studio 11 Gallery and Workshop in Hull in the Fruit Market. Well, the exhibition is called Ceramic Landscape, and it's a culmination of a few years' research into landscape and pollen grains, and particularly living landscape, and how that manifested in this work. I've always been interested in how we remember landscape and what landscape is and how landscape is represented. And I'm also interested in pattern, and I was absolutely thrilled to find out a few years back that actually pattern is not just some kind of frivolous decoration, it's actually something that's really important. In 2012 I worked in Seville for 3 months and had a residency at a wildlife garden called Naturalia, and I researched, alongside a landscape architect, I researched pollen grains and living landscapes and migration routes, and I had the opportunity to spend one day with a professor at Cordoba University analysing and looking at pollen grains through a microscope. And I also try and capture movement, so I draw as quickly as possible really. So after the initial drawings I'll take elements from that and just draw within 2 or 3 minutes with ink and pencil, water, just to try and capture some movement. Here is a lichen pot, which is also part of the exhibition. So again, this is taken from really, really tiny pieces of lichen that grow on trees and stuff. And the reason that I do this, they're not really pieces in themselves, they're working ideas and thoughts, so I can try and capture this. So once I've practiced the movement with pen and ink and pencil, I try and capture that movement in 3D. So I try and work quickly with the pieces of clay and then find out how I'm going to develop this type of movement within the clay. Within evidence of turbulence, I have different types of application onto a sculpture that I made from press moulding and coil building. And within that there's different sizes of leaves, there's extruded clay that references the wind blowing through grass, there's leaves and roses, and also small spikes that you find in stamen within flowers. And within marsh marigold, that references the pollen grain of the marigold as well as how the marigold looks abstractly within nature. So within that I have thrown cones, I have small pieces of leaf on there, I have the stamens that are within the flower on there, so it's a mixture of how that flower would be constructed but quite abstract within the sculpture itself. For yarrow, that one is really about the pollen grain, because the pollen grain of yarrow is really abstract but symmetrical at the same time. So I used cones and coil building and press moulding and some sgraffito marks as well to reference the abstract pattern that you find on the surface of a pollen grain, but also the spikiness and the symmetry that's within it. Well, everything is stoneware, so I fire quite high, and the reason that I fire high is because most of my work in the past has always been for exterior spaces or public spaces, so it has to be really, really tough. So I still use that technique and that way of working because it's really satisfactory for the work now, because the work looks quite delicate, so I have to really fire it as high as possible to make it as tough as possible. So the range of glazes, I use whites and sometimes blue. And the glazes can be dry matte to satin, and the reason that I want to do that is because it is sculpture but it references traditional techniques. So although it looks white and sometimes blue, which is from the classic blue and white ware of the 18th century, I want it to reference the contemporary thought of how sculpture may look. And within matte glazes, the beauty about that is that it soaks the light, so it creates quite strong shadows, and then that mixed with some satin takes your eye around the sculpture and has a little bit of reflection at the same time.